I'm happy to still be here after 60 years to see the beginning and to celebrate our coming 60th anniversary. It's an honor and a blessing. I think it's a gorgeous church.
The logo that we've chosen is, by God's grace, our first 60 years of ministry, because God's not through with us yet. Ralph Shockey was called to be not only the director of the very brand new Lutheran nursing home in Moorestown, but also the chaplain there for a number of years.
Shortly after we arrived, we found that there was no Lutheran church in town, and we had 2 children, so there was no Lutheran Sunday school.
And the idea came about, well, why not a Lutheran church here in Moorestown?
We learned of other Lutheran families, and especially a Mrs. Ward who had 3 children also and was Lutheran. So she and my husband decided they could start a Sunday school class. So that was the beginning of the church, which followed 2 years later. So the Sunday school is older than our congregation. Eventually, the chapel wasn't large enough to accommodate, so a charter was set up at the Lutheran home, and then 3 months later, the charter was taken to the community house where we had the organizational meeting in April 1950.
There are a couple of interesting stories going back to those first people that God really filled with a passion for gathering as a congregation, and also really a spirit of sacrifice. When the church was first able to purchase the Presbyterian church very early on, they were ecstatic, but they discovered that it was very difficult to pay the insurance bill. And so families would take turns each month paying the insurance bill. They'd put their bill aside for the month and pay it late the next month, and then take the church's insurance bill and pay it, and that went around to the families in the congregation. A number of the women early on actually made the paraments, the cloths that go over the altar and the pulpit, and we actually still use a couple of them, the purple one for Lent and the red one for Pentecost. They're just gorgeous. There are things that people remember about all of the pastors, particularly the senior pastors that have served Saint Matthew. Going back to Brooks Moore, really, Pastor Moore. He was the first long-term pastor in the congregation, and folks, just a couple of folks left, remember him as being quite serious and very devoted to the congregation, and he became a missionary afterwards. In the 60s, Pastor Ed Ehlers is remembered as being very extroverted and personable, and drawing a lot of young families into the congregation. Pastor Herlif Jensen, very intelligent man, very concerned about social issues.
Fortunately, we had so many talented people that our congregation just grew, and by 1978, we had about 1,200 baptized members.
Pastor Carl Euling was called after Pastor Jensen, and he was very creative, did a lot with the community. Pastor Gordon Huff was very intelligent, really good teacher, and led prayer exceptionally well. And I think what I'll be remembered most for is that I preach a nice, good, short sermon. God's grace is really experienced primarily by Christians in worship, most clearly and most consistently. God comes to us in worship through word and sacrament, and worship has been, from the very beginning, very important to Saint Matthew Lutheran Church. Good preaching, good music leadership, good song, all very important. And I think that one way you can tell this is that historically, when pastors in the area retire, they tend to join Saint Matthew Lutheran Church. This congregation, going back, has had an emphasis and a deep passion for social ministry. We called Pastor Jensen to be the pastor because he was the director, a key player in the Lutheran Social Ministries Board at that time in the National Church. So the congregation knew Pastor Jensen was very interested and cared very much about social issues, and they called him here then. And since then, we've been a part of a number of local social service organizations and have helped to found a couple of them. Moorestown Ecumenical Neighborhood Development, Rainbow of Hope, and then been a part of a number of other ones. Fellowship, in some ways, is kind of the flip side to social ministry, because we don't have to worry about our relationship to God. Christ is taking care of that. So we can worry about, celebrate with, have fun with, get to know, share life with our neighbor. There's a history in the congregation of gathering people from the community in through fellowship events. There was a group called Pairs and Spares. It was a social group of couples and singles, pairs and spares. And they drew a lot of people in from the surrounding towns who ended up coming to worship. Also, for a time, we were well known in Moorestown particularly for our focus on drama and the arts, and that's actually being resurrected in the last couple of years. This congregation began as a Sunday school and a church happened. So we started in education, and the congregation has had a really illustrious history with Sunday school. Our adult forum, even in the last couple of years, we've gotten a number of prominent leaders of Lutheran, other Christian denominations, Jewish and Muslim communities to come and speak to us and teach us. Looking back at the life of the congregation over time, in some way these aspects have been important to the congregation going back to the beginning.
I think the future holds a lot of promise for us. We have a lot of younger people, which we're very grateful for. So I really look forward to a lot of growth and energy and go on bigger and better. I think this congregation has just a lot to offer and give. We, along with most other congregations, need to work at better connecting with our community and also answering the question, is church relevant? I think that we need to work at that, and that's not an easy task. But we can do it. By God's grace.